through the literature, especially in ethnographic and historical studies, we can see the definition of many different types, that most of them are impossible to identify in the archaeological record because they do not fossilize. The classification of cannibalism in the European prehistory is organized into three main stages. So the first stage includes the early cannibals from La Gran Dolina and Cueva del Aragó, sites dating from between 800,000 to 400,000 years before present. A second stage involving cannibalism among Neanderthals, with a total of 6 cases dating from 130,000 to 45,000 years ago. And finally, a third stage with the anatomical modern humans, that is Homo sapiens. And this stage consists of 17 sites, 5 from the Upper Paleolithic, 2 from the Mesolithic, 7 in the Neolithic, and 3 in the Bronze Age. It should be noted that it is in this stage that the first evidence of ritualization or symbolic treatment of the bodies appears, based on engravings on bones and the creation or manufacture of skull caps, that we will talk about that later. However, identifying cut marks on human remains does not always suggest the consumption of the individuals, as identifying cannibalism is often more complex. There are other contexts in which similar marks occur at different times. For example, there's a perimortem manipulation not associated with consumption that includes cases in which the body is manipulated before decomposition, and other contexts such as violence confrontations involving sharp weapons or projectiles that can also cause these types of modifications, quite similar to the cut marks from the butchering process. We have also the post-mortem manipulation after a period of decomposition of the body, where the main aim is also to clean the skeletal remains. And it's interesting to see that in this context, the percentage of cut marks is very low, around 0.5 to 5%, while in cannibalistic context, it's normally over 30%. And finally, we have all those contexts that are indeterminate because there are few remains and few signs of manipulation. What allow us to talk about, or at least to discuss a possible ritualization or symbolic treatment in this cannibalistic context is the presence of modifications not related to the butchery process. So this is the case of the skull caps, where the skull is intentionally modified, the face and the lower part is carefully removed in order to leave the upper part and conserve the upper part with its natural bowl shape. This has been interpreted in different ways, and they could represent trophies or objects of ancestral veneration. And for the postcranial skeleton, ritual or symbolic aspects can be seen or discussed through bone tools, engravings, and decorations on these specimens. And to understand prehistoric cannibalism, we rely on historic and ethnographic sources, which allow us to draw some parallels with the archaeological record. In fact, these studies actually show us a great diversity in the way remains were treated, cooked, or consumed, allowing us to understand all those aspects that do not fossilize. As I said before, I'm going to talk about three sites with 4 different human assemblages, and notice that 3 of them are located in the Atapuerca mountain range in northern Spain. And the second one is in Poland, in Maszycka Cave. Let's start with the first site, which is Gran Dolina level TD6 from the Atapuerca archaeological complex, which is a complex that includes around 20 archaeological sites, including cave and open air sites. The TD6 level is dated in 0.8 and 0.9 million years and is located in the railroad trench that it's just in the middle of the mountain range. The site has 11 stratigraphic units, resulting in 25-meter thick sediment, and the surface of the excavation is approximately of 90 meters square. These are some pictures. The biggest one shows the whole surface being excavated and marked with this green square. I apologize because it's not very nice, but I think that helps to understand the area and its relation with the red square that just at the bottom, which is actually the test pit that was excavated in the 90s and where Homo antecessor was found back in 1994. So right now, after more than 25 years excavating in extension from TD11 to TD7, we have arrived to the top of the TD6 level, and we are starting to find more human remains, some of them with cut marks. But many of you probably will think, how is possible that took 25 years, because it's quite a lot of years to excavate the upper levels. You can see in the pictures that there's quite a lot of people, but well, that's because in TD10, there was not one, but two bone beds related with mass hunting events studied by Dr. Antonio Rodriguez Hidalgo. And the most spectacular one probably is the bone bed from TD210, which you can see in the figure from the bottom right side of the screen. All the colors in the projection are bone, and the blue dots are bison bone fragments with more than 22,000 specimens. That's why it took so long, and also these bone beds were not noticeable from the test pit, so it was quite a big surprise. So the TD6 level has the oldest evidence of cannibalism and comes from Homo antecessor with 181 bones and teeth from at least 11 individuals, mostly children. And around 44% of these bones show human modifications, including cut marks, bone breakage for marrow extraction in the case of long bones. For skulls, the skulls were broken to have access to the brain. And then we have also human tooth marks. This cannibalism evidence was not for survival, but interpreted as cultural exocannibalism. And when I say cultural, it's due to a publication led by Professor Eudald Carbonell and colleagues that they were able to identify that this behavior was repeated over time. Based on the age of death profiles, it mainly targets vulnerable individuals, especially children, and it's potentially linked to intergroup violence, territorial defense, and expansion, showed some similarities with the patterns seen in chimpanzees. So last summer, we had the finding of a cervical vertebra from a child with cut marks that was presented from the Atapuerca 2025 campaign and had quite a big media coverage, including the National Geographic. And there is this article that I would like to mention, in which you can read in the title that says that scientists found cut marks on a 150,000-year-old human neck. Was it cannibalism? And then there was a comment from a researcher that is not linked to the excavations or to the project that said that this decapitation doesn't mean that they consumed that individual. And I would fully agree with that comment in another context, but not here in Gran Dolina, as what we are finding now is actually the extension of the context found back to in 1994 in the test pit. So we are currently excavating the upper part of the TD6 level. So we should expect very interesting results and as well a good amount of more Homo antecessor specimens in the following years. So now we jump through time, and I will talk about a much modern site compared with Gran Dolina, and this is the upper Paleolithic site of Maszycka Cave. So Maszycka is a cave located around 20 kilometers from the city of Krakow in Poland, in the left slope of the Bratnik Valley. The first excavation took place in 1883 by Władysław Tosowski, who excavated the interior part of the cave and part of the terrace, about 60 meters square. Then in the 1960s, Stefan Karol Kozlowski extended the excavation through the whole terrace. And in 2013, Kozlowski's team excavated Ossowski's heaps, recovering even more material. They couldn't excavate the inside the cave because all the site was already excavated. So the assemblage, this Magdalenian assemblage, is interpreted as a campsite inhabited between autumn and winter. It's assigned to the Magdalenian navets, and the direct dating suggests that through the fauna, bone artifacts, and human remains, that is around 18,000 years before present. So through this whole assemblage, the human remains are about 50 fragments, most of them cranial remains. And this led to two publications, one in 1995 by Kapik and Wersinski, and a revision of the same remains in 2017 by Professor Orshit and colleagues. So the first publication suggested that it was a case of cannibalism, while the revision from 2017 suggested that it was a case of a mortuary treatment that involved the active manipulation of the heads, but without consumption. So the fact that the site didn't have the postcranial skeleton was one of the reasons that allowed them to discard the hypothesis of cannibalism. So our revision was published on February of last year in Scientific Reports, and we studied the 50 specimens already published, plus 13 published that are actually from the postcranial skeleton. These specimens were found in a box in the museum, mixed with faunal remains, and the total assemblage now show a minimal number of 10 individuals, 6 adults and 4 subadults, with a percentage of human activity quite high, about nearly 68%, 67.9%. And in the right side of the screen, you can see the current anatomic representation of the Maszycka Cave human remains. So the cut marks in the cranial skeleton are mainly associated with scalping and defleshing, and in the mandibles with defleshing and disarticulation. And an important thing to notice, and I will talk about that later, is that the manipulation of the skulls has no relation with the manufacture of skull caps. About the postcranial skeleton, cut marks are related with defleshing and disarticulation. There's also an intensive anthropogenic breakage to extract and consume the marrow. And we can see in general that the bodies were handled in the same way and for the same purposes for adults and juveniles. So to have a bigger picture of what's happening during the Magdalenian, after the last glacial maximum and with the emergence of the Magdalenian period, we see that in Europe there are generally few contacts with primary burials. However, there's a high proportion of contacts with isolated and scattered human remains mixed with other materials and showing some of them cultural modifications like cut marks, anthropogenic breakage, pigmentation, etc. So based on that, there are two general contexts proposed. One that suggests that these contexts of manipulation are related to contexts of cannibalism, while others argue that they are mortuary rituals involving the manipulation, but without consumption. In total, there are 17 Magdalenian sites with signs of manipulation. The remains at Maszycka Cave exceed the 67% of bones with human activity and can be associated with the entire butchery process. And there are no taphonomic signs that allow us to speak of ritual or symbolic context through the presence of engravings or skull caps. Sorry. As is the case in other Magdalenian sites like Ghost Cave in the UK, which is quite famous. You probably will know this site, or Brilliant Hall in Germany. So 18,000 years ago in Maszycka, we find ourselves in a post-glacial Europe experiencing a population growth and the availability of new areas with resources that would previously have been covered by ice. This improvement and stability would not be consistent with the case of survival cannibalism, and also the fact that we can see cannibalism through the whole Magdalenian period also argues against this survival or critical context. Although funerary cannibalism cannot be ruled out, the lack of evidence of special treatment leads us to suggest that the most plausible hypothesis is that of intergroup conflict, possibly involving the capture and consumption of a family group. Whether Maszycka Cave was a case of funerary cannibalism or endocannibalism or exocannibalism point to a case of cultural cannibalism. This is also suggested by some genetic studies published in recent years by Marginedas in 2023, which associate the Magdalenian cannibalism with the genetic ancestry of Goyet Q2, while the primary burials are mainly associated with Villa Bruna. And now we go back to Atapuerca to talk about El Mirador Cave, which is a cave with 3 excavation areas. The first one is the test pit, marked by the red square, which was excavated from the 90s until 2009. It's 21 meters deep, with 6 of those meters belonging to the Holocene, and it has a total of 24 archaeological levels. From 2009 until today, the strategy of the excavation changed, and Sector 100 and Sector 200 have been excavated to try to connect the cave with the karstic system and potentially with other sites across the cave. So in these 3 areas, 4 human assemblages with different chronologies have been identified. Let's start with the test pit, where human remains were recovered from a small pit in the Mir 4 level, dating to the early Bronze Age, around 4,400, 4,100 years before present. And the assemblage shows clear evidence of body manipulation and consumption, with abundant cut marks, anthropogenic breakage, boiling, and human tooth marks. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this assemblage is not only its relatively recent chronology, but also the preservation of 6 skull caps. The human assemblage comprises 148 bones, representing a minimum of 6 individuals, 5 adults, and 1 juvenile. The study of these remains supports the interpretation of a ritual context, particularly due to the careful manufacture of skull caps. These skull caps also show evidence of retouched edges, as visible by the notches in the bottom left image. And although some researchers have suggested that skull caps may have had domestic purposes, there is currently no evidence to support this interpretation. Moreover, the absence of use wear along the edges that does not suggest a repetitive or a practical use of the skull caps. So the skull caps appear to be directly linked to the cannibalistic event and were likely abandoned together with the rest of the human remains after fulfilling their role in the practice. At present, the interpretation of the context remains a little bit open, as it could represent either exocannibalism or endocannibalism. In the new areas, a Chalcolithic mass burial was found in Sector 200, which is not related to any type of cannibalism. There are more than 30 individuals, and then there's a Middle Bronze Age inhumation in Sector 100 that is also not related with cannibalism at all. However, below both areas and both the mass burial and the individual inhumation, new specimens showing signs of manipulation started to appear like 5-6 years ago. So the study of these new remains with signs of manipulation were published in three papers. The last one was published in July in scientific reports, July 2025, where we directly dated 8 specimens showing cut marks and anthropogenic breakage from both sectors, so sector 100 and sector 200. And the results place the assemblage between 5,700 and 5,600 years before present. And the Bayesian modeling suggests that this was a very short event. Also, the strontium isotope analysis indicate that the individuals were likely of local origin. So the assemblage includes 650 specimens with a minimum of 11 individuals, 3 children, 2 juveniles, and 6 adults. Cut marks, as in the other cases, are linked to soft tissue removal and the disarticulation of the bones. And the skull fragments, cut marks, show a low frequency of modifications. So also, they are not associated with the manufacture of the skull caps, which is something that that it resembles at some point the case of Maszycka. About the anthropogenic breakage is again associated with destruction and consumption of the marrow from the long bones and brains from the skulls. This breakage is visible through percussion pits, abrasions, notches, and peeling. And there are also human tooth marks, mostly on the metapodials, phalanges, and ribs. And the metric analysis of these marks overlaps with the ranges published in experimental studies on human tooth marks. And in addition, there's no carnivore activity. So the human remains from both sectors belong to the same event and show that the entire body was processed and consumed. And this is important to keep in mind as the whole surface of the site is not being excavated. Radiocarbon dating indicates a very short event in time. And despite contextualizing these remains is quite complex, but we can discard, or at least we can propose the elimination of some context. So first, the lack of recurrence of cannibalistic behavior would allow us to rule out that this was a funerary practice established within the cultural tradition of this group. As if it was the case, we should see cannibalism more present through the levels and visible also through the datings. Also, there's no evidence of famine or starvation in the whole record. So this leads us to consider it together with the fact that it was a single episode as another possible case of exocannibalism. In fact, several studies suggest that the Neolithic period was a violent moment, and in that specific case, we can see some behavioral similarities to other Neolithic sites also with cannibalism, like Fumbregois or Hirschheim. And to close, just a quick summary. So in TD6, the Homo antecessor remains shows the oldest clear evidence of human cannibalism in the archaeological record. It's exciting to think that in the coming years, we will be able to study this material in more depth and hopefully get a clearer picture of the cultural and behavioral patterns of this unique species. For the Magdalenian site of Maszycka Cave, this has allowed us to identify a new case of cannibalism that was previously discarded. And this study explores different hypotheses that could have led to this practice during the Magdalenian. Also, the fact that there are 17 Magdalenian sites with cut marks is quite striking to me. Considering that much of this research was done in the 80s and the 90s, a revision of some of these sites would be very interesting. In the Mirador Cave, we have 2 episodes of cannibalism at the same site, separated by around 1,300 years, with different treatments of the bodies. While the Bronze Age assemblage includes the skull caps, these are absent in the Neolithic one. This is also interesting in terms of differential treatment, especially when compared to other European sites where skull caps appear, and so when there are cut marks, there are skull caps, and where there are no skull caps in the same context, like the Magdalenian, the Neolithic, or the Bronze Age. And finally, all these cases are still being studied in more depth. So hopefully we will soon be able to provide more data and go further in understanding and better characterizing such complex behavior. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Francesc. That was a great presentation, and I think really quite a lot of convincing evidence. So we'll do the Q&A. If anyone does have a question, use the raised hand function or just type it in the chat. I've got one. You mentioned El Mirador.
Mm-hmm.
You can rule out that it was a starvation situation because there was no signs of famine. Could you speak a bit more about how you would detect famine when there's no soft tissue evidence?
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. So in the same level where there's the cannibalistic event, we can see that the faunal remain. I mean, there's a lot of animals that were also processed and consumed, and also the paleoecological reconstruction of the environment through paleobotany shows that it was quite a good moment. So we don't have any evidence of some kind of a crisis. And on the other hand, so it's not only just because of that, but also having during the Neolithic, the earliest parts of the moments of the Neolithic and the latest. This is from the late Neolithic. We have cannibalism in different moments. So this is also difficult to relate this with starvation and with survival cannibalism. Also, the fact that some of these Neolithic sites have skull caps. Skull caps, if we really accept the skull cap as a symbolic and as a ritual thing, then that can discard the survival option, at least in a general picture. However, it's very complex. It's very challenging to do these interpretations, and yeah, so potentially we think that it's exocannibalism.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm sorry if I missed it, but was there any evidence on the Upper Paleolithic sites that ruled out famine?
Mostly for the same reasons as in the Neolithic. So we can see like some parallels. Actually, these are the two periods that we can see that there's a bigger amount of cannibalistic sites. So I think it's an interesting thing to explore in the future.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. We've got a question from Rebecca who asks, thanks for a great talk. Is anyone attempting to combine DNA from processed human remains with sedimentary DNA in the same context in order to try and refine information on whether we're looking at endo versus exo cannibalism?
Yes. So there's this paper from Marsh and Bello from I think it's from 2023 that's basically what they tried based on published information on the DNA that it was available. Is a preliminary analysis. So I guess that in the future they will do that study more in depth. I'm not sure if I understood if I answered correctly your question.
It sounded correct to me. It's in the chat if you wanted to reread it again. Could you just repeat the name of the paper that you said is due?
Yeah, it's from Marsh and Bello.
Marsh and
2023.
Yeah, just put that in the chat if anyone wants to look it up. I hope that answers your question, Rebecca, sorry. Anybody else have any questions? Just raise your hand. I'll pop it in the chat. I've got a question. What is the difference between endo and exo cannibalism?
Yeah, so exocannibalism means the consumption of members of another group and is mostly associated with violent context. And endocannibalism is the consumption of a member of the same group, potentially associated as an act of love and respect to your own relatives.
Brilliant, thanks.
Sorry, I think I misunderstood the question from Rebecca. I think that she's asking from DNA from the sediments, maybe.
Yeah, combined with the DNA from the human remains.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry. I just checked now in the chat. No one have tried that. So I don't know. Yeah, it would be something interesting to see. Yeah.
I think Rebecca just raised her hand. Did you have a question? It's gone down now. Nope. Okay.
Hello. Yes. Hello.
Oh,
Sorry, I had to. Yes, you did understand my question the second time. So.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca.
My interest has been in the evidence from Neanderthals and more broadly, and yeah, it strikes me that would be another way to address this question, where we have strong evidence of particular practices in one site, but we still don't know who the people doing the eating is. Exactly. So the Bellow and Marsh paper is good, but it's not addressing that question. It's trying to look at cultural associations with genetic groups, but you could actually try, if you had a large enough number of samples within a particular context in one site, you could look at the sedimentary DNA, which is the DNA of the people living in that site, and determine, especially if you have an isotopic signature for the processed remains, which is non-local.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought, Rebecca. Thank you very much. And yeah, it will be very, very interesting to try to do something like this, because we always know who were the people that were eaten, not the eaters. So especially in chronologies, for example, like in the case of Homo antecessor, we are assuming that Homo antecessor was eaten by other Homo antecessor individuals, but maybe we are wrong. So that's a really interesting point of view. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Trinder just asked to follow up. So is endo associated with burial practices? If you'd be able to clarify.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, so endocannibalism can also be can be defined as funerary cannibalism, for sure.
Sure. Excellent, thanks. So looks like we've got no more questions at the moment. We'll just give it another minute if anyone has any last minute questions. I was wondering how many more societies today practice mortuary cannibalism, and what have you learned from them that sort of supports what you were learning archaeologically?
Well, today it's difficult to say. Apparently, currently it's supposed that there's no groups practicing cannibalism. However, we have these all historical and ethnographic sources that actually give us a lot of information about 60, 70 years ago. And yeah.
Okay, it looks like there's no further questions, so we'll wrap up now. Thank you very much, Francesc, for a really interesting talk.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody who came to watch. And I hope you'll join us all next week.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.